clearly, from all these topics and what everyone knows is that our first-party data is super valuable, and it's becoming even more so. The importance of that collection, the importance of getting more from it is really critical. The other side of this, more from the technical side, is that ownership of that first-party data and the full control of that first-party data in order to enable our activation activities is also super, super critical. So that fact, as well as this changing ecosystem, really comes together and drives us to a new method for data collection as well as data distribution. And that's server-side data distribution. And in our next session, I would like to welcome my colleague, Tyler Blatt, who will really break down these concepts, the shift from client-side to server-side data collection and distribution, simplify it for business understanding, and really highlight some of those keys to think about moving forward as you start thinking about this architecture. Tyler?
Thanks, brother. How we doing, everybody? So before we get started, I want to talk about myself just a little bit. I'm very silly. I like to talk very fast. I'm going to work on slowing down here. I'm kind of all over the place. I just had a new baby, and I'm all jet lagged, so very tired. And InfoTrust tried to tell you all this in my title. So Manager of Emerging Solution Strategy, I'm literally a mess. It's a mess. So I'll do my best to pace this, but we've also got a lot of slides to get through. So I'm going to try to slow down, but it's a lot of content. Just sit there with me. So what are we going to talk about today? Really, if we look at what's going on in the industry, everybody wants to tell you, and even the title is like, server-side, just go with server-side. It's what you should do. Go with server-side. But really, we got to answer some questions on why we want to get there. Why is server-side popping up everywhere? What's going on? What are the industry changes? When I, as an engineer, look at what's going on with the industry, I want to be able to answer these questions to people that say, like, why should I invest this rather than just shoving products down their throat? I want to get there logically on why this is a needed change. So we're going to use a couple questions to answer that. Firstly, we're going to ask, I'm having trouble reading that with this slide. Why are we here and how did we get there? So what set up this industry? Like, what is the groundwork that got us to this point in which there needs to be a shift change? Assuming, and we all know, that privacy has definitely changed the landscape. If we can't do things we could do with data, well, what are the things you can do with data? What are the other options? What can we do? How can we explore this differently? Ultimately, we're going to take a look at today's infrastructure. What is not working with today's infrastructure? What problems are arising? These are the challenges we're trying to overcome. And the last thing we're going to do is, how do we build towards that future? What groundwork can I lay today that makes it easier for me to go through? I don't want to have to keep patching this current system. So we're going to try to figure out how can we build towards that future in an effective and good way. So first of all, how do we get here? Where are we and how do we get here? Really simple view of this. The internet is born and it's great. It's an informational highway. There's information traveling everywhere, and it starts to become this thing everybody wants to use, but there's this early problem. Tim Berners-Lee, not too far from here, comes up with this idea, and we're going to do this, and then we're like, well, how do we monetize this? All these businesses want to get on it, and then we come to this great idea that there's real estate on a web page. We can just show content on the web page, and then that'll get us money back, and then everybody's got to put their websites out there, make their money, and this is like the really basic version. And it was originally random, but then started making a little bit more money off of something that we all now know is contextual advertising. We're going to give them ads based on that context. So a real quick example, in case there's somebody in here, and I doubt there is anybody that doesn't know this, what contextual is, here's a web page that is showing the hottest fashion trends in handbags, and they're going to show her shoes. So whoever this person is there is going to look at shoes based on the context of the website they're at. And there's obviously this whole industry built around what context do my customers have, what are the best contextual examples to reach out to them, but this was like this early version. And then somebody thought, well, what if we attract those signals everywhere? And this is really the third-party cookie and this thing that we're now getting rid of, but this was this thought that's going to bring this sea change to the industry. What if we went to every single website and we looked at what they're interested in and what pages they go to and what signals they have, and we stitched it all together and we know everything? What's that going to do? Well, it's going to make us be able to communicate with them more specifically. We'll know what they want, the advertisements will get better, and now the free internet just gets stronger. And this wasn't a particularly evil idea. We look at this now as like, they're collecting all the data, and it didn't center around this point of, we don't want you to have privacy, we don't want this. It was really genuinely coming from, how do we make the free internet better? And that's something that I still want to make better, but within the context of privacy. Well, what did that do? It worked. This is the advertising industry over a period of time, and you can see it's definitely growing and growing and growing. So year over year, the industry brings more developers, more solutions, more things in, like, how do we make this better? How do we feed this system of data that we've created that's obviously trending upwards for advertising? Those developers went to work. This is the map of 2022 and how many solutions are out there. I literally, like, we're Google partners at InfoTrust. I went to look for the Google products. I had to, like, search through and find where are we going in here? Where do the other competitors? There's so many platforms. I'll tell you something else that has nothing to do with this presentation. Every one of these platforms have a sales team that's trying to get your money, they want your data, your customers' data. Good luck doing governance on this. Like, you want to go, hey, where did we send data? We got to go delete it. Let me find you on this map. This is where we sent your data. So it's obviously the industry just, like, exploded. And that then becomes difficult to manage. If you're paying attention at all, the idea of simplicity, this is the opposite. If you look at what's happened is the industry just exploded. So the current architecture is, like, completely built around signal-rich targeting. Like, everything that we do is about, what are we doing with data? We got to identify users everywhere they go. We know who they are, consent or no consent. We have to know who everybody is. Why? Well, we got to send every signal to every platform. I don't want to have to get platform insights from this one over here and this one over here, so just send every little bit of data that we have about every user to every single platform. And that is everything. Like, the current TMS system is built around that concept. Unifying data across brands. We're like, well, I got signals over here, I got signals over here, I got signals over here. How do I get it all together and make it make sense in one place? And that's not even a trivial thing to do today, but it's built that way. It's mostly web and mobile. So a thing that you'll think about is the internet's evolving. I mean, like, you're seeing, like, ideas of AR and VR. You're seeing IoT devices, loyalty programs, and store kiosks. None of this was built for that. It was all built for web and mobile. So it's not even really built in the concept that it should be scaling with our technology. If we look at, a lot of this is around, like, personalized targeted advertising. So even, like, in the contextual field, it's still about getting as many signals to expand your context. And then obviously we have behavioral, which is like, this is you, I'm targeting to you, and it's very much built around that concept. And then communicating through every marketing channel. So, like, listening to Adam and what users want earlier and thinking from a user perspective, the current system is just like, well, we got to get them into our CRM, and we need their email and their address, and we got to send them text messages, and we got to stay on top of them. And there's this fatigue to be a user in this system. So it's not even built around the way of thinking about how we can communicate with our customers smarter. It's just collect it all, send it everywhere, we'll figure it out later. And that's very much the current infrastructure. Users do not like this. So if we look at what happened, there's this growing sentiment of just, under the assumption of this free internet that we're going to build out all these systems. What really happened was people were like, the sentiment started rising, we don't like this, and governments start realizing that and making regulations, and we have to get out of this system. And everybody is doing this. They're, like, freaking out, like, what happened? But this bottom sentence is really important. Changing to a privacy-centric infrastructure is not a burden, but instead a chance for us to better engage with customers, learn how to be more clever with our data, and become more efficient in our collective processes. You can edge out your customers just by paying attention to what they want. When we come in here, the system is going to change. This legislation is coming. We're already seeing it a lot more here than even what we see in the States, and the infrastructure has to change. So by leaning into this and looking at it as an opportunity, you can set up tomorrow's infrastructure and edge out your competition. You can start building to this new future, and that's what we're going to try to explore today. So what can you do with data? And everybody's freaking out. What are we going to do? We can't target anybody. This is ridiculous. I'm not going to read off slides the whole time, but these ones I think are important to read. Privacy is not the death of behavioral targeting or even signal-rich targeting. Privacy is the death of unwanted targeting, and it should be. If people don't want to be targeted, we should be listening to what they're saying. I mean, that's most of what Adam talked about this morning. We should be paying attention to them, and that's obviously going to drive sentiment. This is actually a thought I had while speaking that I'll just do a little more ad hoc here. How many people are running CLVs? And of those CLVs, if you have an audience earlier that's actually mad about privacy, they're secretly holding this sentiment that they're not really happy to engage with your brand, they're not happy that they're seeing ads, and you had not run Adam's test yet to put them into the categories of users and how they feel, how much more value can you get out of a CLV, out of the people that are in the green, that they're increasing their trust and they want to know what's coming? So even the models, this end of cycle things that we're doing, without those classifications of users, we're just looking at data and guessing, even from a probability standpoint. So signal-rich advertising, that's not the only thing we can do with data. What can you do with data? Well, there's a couple things, and the categories are more complicated than this, but this is a simplified version just so we can look at it. And I'm not gonna read all of what's on here, but the idea of analysis being, the fundamental point of data is that we can look at it and discover something. We're gonna ask it questions. We wanna know what is it doing. We have to engage with this data from the concept of it's supposed to tell us something. We're supposed to learn something about our business. A/B testing, and really I should take A/B out of this, just testing. Like just the concept of testing. We can use it to stimulate. If stagnation is the enemy, we have data here, poke the system and see what changed. And there's never a wrong test. You just find out, hey, that didn't work. I got some insights from that, or that did work, and we'll continue moving on that process. Prediction. Hey, if people think this is a step back in the past when we're going into privacy, that we have to go back to the old contextual as king and we got to move to this, we got a lot more machines now. We have a lot more clouds available. It is, you go to your engineering team, they will figure it out, and prediction's a big piece of this. We can start filling in gaps of data that will be missing. We can predict future trends. We can find analysis with machines that we couldn't do before. So just even leaning into that concept is another huge thing of data that people miss often. Enrichment. So this is, you can think of, I'm gonna reach out to people that can possibly enrich. I'm gonna add CLV scores. I can get with partners that might also have consented data, and we can marry up as long as I wanna pay attention to the fact that when you're reaching in the cookie jar and marrying data, that users do know that. We are talking about privacy centric, but we can go out and find out how can we enhance, how can we enrich our data set. And then ultimately there's ad targeting, which I don't need to explain. Everybody knows this column could really be called actionization. How can I use this data to take some action? So at the end of the day, I'm going to reach out to people. I've been able to categorize my users and do something with it. This is really what's been going on, is these four little small pieces are really just contributing to the big ad targeting bucket. I mean, really, when people say, how are we going to monetize setting up GTM, setting up GA, going down the cycle, and they're just building this whole collection, is what they're really saying is, how do we get to the end of the road where we make money off of people, and then we can justify this whole process. And then we think, once we're done and we have that set up, and we're like, well, what if we could use prediction to increase the big one? What if we can analyze better to increase the big one? What if we could test to increase it? And all that we're thinking through is this like myopic lens of this is how the industry looks, but it doesn't have to be that way. This is an interesting thing. So they were essentially looking around for how people are thinking of strategies for the upcoming third-party cookie deprecation and the device identifiers are going. And this is the plans of tech leaders. This was done in 2021. Contextual targeting, that's safe. It's not going anywhere, so that's good. I can agree with that one. That makes a lot of sense. No surprise from InfoTrust, I agree with this one. First-party data. Well, as long as we own things and we know what's going on, we know what we can do with it. We can potentially take some action. But I find some of these other ones funny. Publisher first-party identifiers, so they just go, hey, you figured out how to track the whole internet. Go figure it out again. I'm not doing that. It's not my business. It's not a very good way to, it's a bet, and you're hedging your bets that you hope the industry figures it out. Industry identifiers. So you say, okay, let's all get together and we'll all make a plan. Well, good luck having people not try to edge each other out and kick each other out of the plan. So that's one that I'm nervous about going into. Browser-provided frameworks, sure, but again, you're gambling on the fact that this even comes out or this is even going to be a thing or it's going to be done at scale and that users are going to enjoy that. So again, you don't really have any control. And then bespoke identity solution was just insane to me. There's the idea that we're gonna have our own and we're gonna operate in our own and the industry's gonna adopt to us. So looking at these, even I can tell the industry doesn't have a clear plan on exactly what we're gonna do, but I can definitely say I agree with the top two. So at least we're generally thinking in the right direction. And the rest are serious gambles. So how do we react to this sea change? So if we see like there's a sea change going with our data, we have to think about like, what do we actually need to do? I'm actually gonna talk on the bottom before I even go through these points because I'll kind of iterate on each of these points. Control, agility, and ownership. And I honestly could have ordered those a little better, so I'm gonna start with ownership. If you own something, that means you get to control what you do with it. You can decide, oh, this is what I want to change about this platform, and this is what I want to do, and you're not stuck saying, well, the platform doesn't do this. So when you look at things in ownership, that means you get to decide, you have the control to react. And with that control becomes agility. So if you engineer really well, and you architect really well, and you think of things, I'll even give an example. If you look at what's happening with French legislation right now, and we're going to talk about server-side later, I promise I'm getting to that. If you set up a server-side container and it's being collected regionally, that means I control where data is processed. I own my container. I own where I'm sending data, and I own where I put it. So I can put it right there in France, and I can serve it there. And then where's data being processed? It's being processed in France. And what if I want to stand up a French BigQuery? Now, When GA is, what are we going to do with GA4 in France? We're not sure how we're going to collect. How do we purge identifiers and send it? I have the control and server side to edit that data. I can edit it and still send it to GA, keep the lights on, let GA4 do the good things that it's going to do. Make sessions, do attribution, tell us where things are going. And that's great, but I can strip all these identifiers that France doesn't want these American identifiers until we get GA4 servers in Europe going over there. But I can take all those and I can store them in a French BigQuery. That's legal. We're still able to do this, and we can control it and we can put governance on it. Do you, in your current infrastructure, own the ability to do that? Do you have the control to change where things are happening, change the data that's going, and do you have the agility to react to the market? So when the next country pops up, the next thing, how quick do you have to react, or do you have blanks in your data? So what we're talking about is a good example to say, these three things are gonna enable you to react to the market. This is how when you're thinking of infrastructures, you should be poising yourself to look through that lens and everything that you look at. So these are the things that I'm suggesting. So own all your data in raw format. So essentially, this is first-party data. That's what I'm saying here is own it in yourself. You can decide what you do with it. Don't hide it behind the platforms. Now, still use platforms that enrich your business sense, but don't hide the data you need behind platforms with no access to it. What happens if you need to switch? What insights go away? You need to delete things. You need to remove things. Anything that you want to change, you own it and can interact with it. Interpret it into own data into usable groups, like known, unknown, consented, not consented. You got to get used to the idea that everything needs to be looked through this lens. If we're going to think about these groups and ask questions about these groups, we need to put them in those lenses. We need to understand how we're organizing our data. Let's make governance easy. That's the next one. We got to build a system where this is a nightmare. We got to track 1,000 tags on the site and which ones read what and where do we send them and how do we undo it. And it's you remember the slide for 2022. There's a million platforms, a million signals, and they're all going everywhere. How can we possibly make sense of this? Let's make governance easy. For consented identifiers, so people that came in, we got to start bringing them together. Get them into a CDP. If we're going to take action on these people, how do they want to be communicated with? What are their wishes? What groups can I put them in? Let's make this easier and build an infrastructure around that concept alone. So marketing data warehouse, consume all platform data for consented people into one place. Like, how can I get all my insights just laid there? I don't need to answer what's going on in Facebook in Facebook. I don't need to answer what's going on in AdWords in AdWords. How do I bring this all into one place where I can just understand it? And then take action. I can be able to do something. That's the fundamental point of why we collected all this, why we're doing all this. Set up for experimentation with walled gardens, second-party data for enrichment, and really anything. So just be ready. So in that experimentation even goes further to like flock and fledge or anything that's happening in the privacy sandbox or anything that ends up coming out. Are you ready to be able to experiment with these things? And then leverage cloud and AML pipelines. You're going to have to fill data gaps. Well, we can predict let's say data goes dark. Well, we have prediction engines that can predict exactly what that trend would have been and kind of react. If you've got to start rebuilding your contextual model, how can you use the current signals now that were behavioral to inform how to expand contextual? Do you have a plan on how you can expand your contextual? You can use prediction, you can use analysis, you can lean into cloud and AI to figure out how you can go back down this journey. So that's a big thing is getting close, get your data into a format and closer to cloud where you can do a lot more with it. The fundamental value of data is to ask questions. That's the whole point is we ask this data questions and we get some insight back. That's why we did all this. So if you're looking at this consent model changing and then you're saying you have these questions that you're bringing to your data and you can't answer it, then what was the point of what we collected? So the underlying model is changing and everyone's saying like, well, will you just use a different identifier? We'll just do that. And everyone's trying to patch the system when in reality the system wasn't built for this at all and it's not answering the questions that we're asking. What percentage of our users are consenting and continuing to engage with the brand? That's simple enough. You can do it with some things. But as these questions go on, you start to ask more complicated questions. So what contextual channels are best contributing to an unknown user group? How do I grow unknown? These people aren't consenting with me. And now I have to think, I don't have the behavioral data to tell me what's going on. Do I have the system to look at my unknown users and realize context is the inbound? That's what's bringing them in. These other advertising, it's either branding or we're reaching out to them in channels where we're not behaviorally targeting them. How do I grow that? Do you have the infrastructure to start asking these questions? So when you think about your plan, and not every one of these questions is right for everyone in this room, but the important thing is to know what questions you're going to ask the data and make sure the data is being supported to answer those. Everybody gets under this veil that we're just going to collect data and then we'll make sense of it later. But the data that you collect, and if you follow Nadal's minimization, should be targeting these key questions that we need to answer. And if you're predicting where it's going and there's this market trend, is your current infrastructure set up for this? So I can stay on time here, and Lucas doesn't come and break my knees for being up on stage too long. Real quickly here, so questioning our data, determine the most important questions, what I was just talking about, build a system to answer those questions, and then expand your questions, expand the system. What did we learn from what we looked at? How do we expand those questions and then expand the system? And just following those 3 simple rules, data will continue to serve your company. It won't be a burden. How do we set up this infrastructure? Then what do we do with it? It's the thing that starts a life cycle that is answering the questions. And your bosses and bosses' bosses will be like, this guy always knows the answers, because you're continuing to put that out there. You're continuing to follow the framework. So what's not working with today? What's not going on with the client side? And thank you, Ben Fisher. I stole this image from Ben Fisher, who is a server-side GTM guy. I thought it was a good way of showing this. So Ben, if you get to look at this, thank you for the image. What's going on with client side? And first I need to explain what client side is, just because some people technically don't get the idea. Really what you need to think, and why this is good, is the web container is running within the computer. This is your client's computers. Every person across all of your user base, the data collection is in a place that you don't own. It's on their computer. Everything that's happening is on their computer. You don't control the browser type. You don't control what plugins they have. You don't control if they've not updated things. You control nothing. This is all happening within their container, and their computer will then communicate directly with those ad platforms. You're not even running it through your own systems or doing to do anything. They're just going straight to all the ad platforms from their computers. You've just put some code that tells them how to do that on their page. That's really what's happening client side, is that's all being executed there. So what are the problems with it? All the tracking happens client side. Like, everything's going on their computer, and that's just a problem in itself. Most signals are sent to most platforms. We talked about that earlier. The governance idea is a nightmare. How are we going to trace down all of these things? Processing is performance expensive. I mean, we're going to get to server side in a little bit, but that's one of the biggest points that people have been attaching to, and it's not my favorite, but it's many people's favorite, is that we're just going to see an SEO boost because page performance just got better. We just lifted a bunch of stuff off the page. All these tags, all these pixels, I'll go a little bit technical here. There's a number of TCP IP connections in every browser. What does that mean? They're like highways. We got to download this web page, and we're going to take up these highways. And every time you fire a tag, you're going to take up one of these highways, and that's taking time that another image on the page isn't loading, or some of the text isn't loading. These things aren't loading. And especially when you think of like lower infrastructure companies or countries, this is a big deal. I mean, we're taking a lot of things that we have to load, where they have to go get communication, grab this tag, bring it back, figure out how we're going to load, and that becomes a problem. It's really expensive. So we see a huge page performance impact just by having all these pixels loading on a page. The data is very public. So I was originally, my field of choice was I was going to go into penetration testing and essentially ethical hacking. So I would look in and teach people how to protect their data, that kind of thing, and that was my passion. And when I first got into GTM, I was like, oh my God, this is all public. You can do whatever you want. It's essentially, we're injecting code onto a website, and we can do whatever we want. We can track any data we want, and it's crazy. So the data is very public. We store it in our data layer, and any tag can look at that. So if somebody fires a tag that we're unaware of, or some tag got through, it's reading that data. We haven't tracked where it went. We have no idea where it went. And then someone's like, hey, I only provided you with this email address, and it ended up all these places. You have no idea how to trace it because you've been storing it in a super public way. Limited ways to to send data. That's what I was talking about, mobile, web. It's like IoT is expanding. Your brand's expanding. Everything you're doing, the touch points that users are engaging with are expanding. This infrastructure is not built for that. It's not built for being able to fire and collect in all these different places. So it's just fundamentally flawed in that way. It's difficult to track where data is being sent. So JavaScript has this concept of piggybacking. And essentially, a tag can fire a tag, can fire a tag, can fire a tag, and it's really hard to read that code. JavaScript's also like not the prettiest language to look at, so even as an engineer like myself, it can take a while to find out what fired what and went through. We actually have a product built around that called Tag Inspector at InfoTrust, just tracing where you're sending data and what. And without that product, it's pretty much impossible to know on a page all the tags that you fired and where the data went. So this is a fundamental flaw that we've literally productized around. And there's no setup for data ownership. You can sort of get away with it. I mean, I was playing around with tags in 2017 that would send data to BigQuery, but it's flawed in the way that you would set it up. Essentially, you have to make your data set public, where you're sending data, and people can look at it and see where it's going, so there's even flaws in that. I'm actually going to skip through a lot of these real quick. I don't know if we're sharing the slides or not, and you can always reach out to me and can help share some of this content. I've got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure we go through the server-side stuff, but these are essentially looks at all of the reasons for these points. So it's a little bit of what I just iterated on all of these, but these are a few more points on each of these that what makes them specifically valuable. I'll spend like 10, 20 seconds on these and just let you guys read. Also, I talk fast, so I'm catching my breath, but I wasn't gonna say that. This ownership's a big one. That's just not set up for that, and that's going to be important going forward. So how do we build the future? What are we doing? Well, what do we need it to do? We need this new system to facilitate data ownership, offer control of where we collect, route, and process. So if we have to change data en route, we need that control. We can't say the platform doesn't support it. Jaime's got to go to legal and say, we can't use this platform because it doesn't do the thing that we need it to do. Do you want to have the handcuffs on, or do you want to control? Be built around the need for governance and privacy. That's coming, so it has to be built for this. Address all those shortcomings from client side. Reduce time to insights. I mean, we have to wait longer and longer processing platforms go, so that's important. And lower the company effort to evolve the tracking plan. If we're going to ask questions, answer them, and ask more questions, this can't be a month-long thing. It needs to be a cycle. It's quick. We iterate on this. And server-side's really set up to do all those. So what we have with server-side tagging is these are the main points, and I'll spend as much time as I can on each of those points without going too far over. First things I would say, and to explain server-side like I did client-side, essentially what we're doing is we're taking that code off of the web page and we're putting a web app in the middle. That's all that's really happening. This is like, think of it like any other application on the web. We're just putting a middle layer, and that means all that processing, all that tag collection, all that public data, everything that's there, no longer. We just send it here, and then we want it to spend 10 minutes processing. It's not going to affect page performance. So we can do whatever we want in the middle. Also, no piggybacking. We're going to explicitly send data where we're going. Everything's going to be very explicit, very controlled. Governance becomes very, very easy. So let's go through these points real quick and talk about why each of them is important. So one, move your tracking to a company-owned server. We talked about the advantages of agility, ownership, control. We even talked about the French example. If it's your country-owned server, you can do exactly what you want with it, and you won't fall into these regulation holes. Data routing is simplified and explicit. So we are sending very specific events there, and we can verify that only very specific events get routed to where they're supposed to go, and that's all configured. So we don't have to ask ourselves where we sent data. We told you what we sent, and we have the receipt. So we can go back and undo that if we have to, but it's all very easy, and it's not hard to engage with. Can enrich, process, and respond. Best thing about server-side GTM, respond. So we can enrich it. We can actually add a CLV score before it ever goes to where it's going. That's great. We can enrich the data stream. We can start grabbing other insights and get them going downstream where they're supposed to go. We can process. We can remove PII. We can encrypt and decrypt. We can do all these things that take a long time that we can't do on the server side. So this is enabling. The response is specific to server-side GTM in this space. And the coolest thing, we can actually send cookies back based off of CLV score, which feed personalized experience. So for these consented users that want to tell us things about themselves, we can pick them up in the cloud, send them right back, and we can get those analytics responses on page so it can better the experience with that customer. So if we look at things like even exercising some of the consent concepts that Adam was talking about, we can find how they want to be engaged with and engage with them in that way, and it allows us to give those responses. Data can be more private, so I just talked a little bit about encryption. We can encrypt data at the point, decrypt it down the road, and nobody's listening to what's happening in the middle. It's impossible. They're looking at encrypted data and don't know how to use it. So this becomes very easy for us to make sure we don't have any breaches. It can support data streams from anywhere. So we talked about IoT, kiosks. You might run Roku devices or ads on different, like how do we collect on all these different things? It's supported to collect data from anywhere. Like I said, it's a web app. We just send data to it. It's not built for the web. It's not built for mobile. It's built to collect data from anywhere. Support streaming to data warehouses. First party, that's been it's one of our main pillars. It's really important. So can we just put this straight in the data warehouse? And what that allows us to do is that second point, lower time to insights. Not only control it, not only can we interpret our own way, I don't have to wait on the processing. It went straight to my place. So if I want to have KPIs with the UTMs that drove them in a short table that I put in front of a dashboard that's real time that I'm going to show to leadership, hey, look how well these UTMs are performing, and you can watch it throughout the day. If I want to share it with marketing and they want to pump channels during your biggest year, your biggest cycle of the year, here's an instant dashboard built on our data that we fully control. It's very easy to leverage the cloud because we're built on these new tools. So this is leaning into that infrastructure. I got 2 minutes left, so I'm actually, same thing I did for client side. I'll spend a couple seconds on these slides just so you can see the context, but I've in general overviewed the top of them. Mostly I covered most of the things that you're gonna say, but this is more for if you share this deck externally, everybody can follow through the points and the narrative speaks for itself. Good to go?
Yeah.
Okay, I gotta.
You got more than that.
Okay, cool, yeah. I'll talk a little bit more on these, and then we got a slide at the end, and then we can go ahead and wrap up. So I talked about the enriching with CLV score. I talked about being able to process. So like this idea where on client side, everything is like really expensive. Everything that we do, like even loading them in, I talked about, like in third world countries or even countries that are just not that great of an internet infrastructure, it is literally crippling to fire tags for how their load page. I mean, it's terrible. So we think we're taking all of that code and we're lifting it to a place, and not only is that good that we solve that problem, but we're also solving the problem of what else do we want to do with it before it goes there. Now all of a sudden you have open options and you can tell your engineer, could we do this? And they're going to say yes. They're just going to give you a timeline. Everything is possible, just how much time do we have and is it something that we should do? So we have all this processing and enrichment available. We can also return data. So I've already hit on that point pretty hard, but that is huge. So if you think of any insight, anything that happens that you want to signal back, so even the idea of like a consented user who now has interest in a product, we can do favorite products come back on the page. We could literally go look at GA and say this person was okay identifying them and they want to have a better experience, and we really don't have tags or partners for product recommendations yet. You could build a mini product recommendation with a cloud function and a server-side GTM container, very, very straightforward thing to do, where when a user identifies themselves and they say it's okay, we can look at that cloud function, go to their Google Analytics, what products have they engaged with the most, which ones have they repeated on, send them back and start altering and tailoring their experience right there, and that's all possible server-side GTM. Good luck doing that with client-side. That's a nightmare. I've been with InfoTrust for about 10 years, and I spent probably 5 of them working on client-side tag management systems in various reasons. Yeah, that wouldn't be a good idea. It'd be very, very difficult. We talked about the privacy. So essentially, at the end of the day, it is a big pain to have all of your data stored locally where anyone can read it. And what we're doing is we're just putting a big blanket over that data. We're putting it all into a package, and we're shipping it somewhere where once we unbox it, then we'll say what that data is and where we want to send it. And we'll send it explicitly. But it's not allowing people to just look into the box and say, oh, you got some good data there. Well, I'll just take this and move on. What we're essentially doing is wrapping our package for the safety while it travels to our server-side container, and it won't cause us to have those governance nightmares. This one, again, I don't need to spend too much time on. Track everything, everywhere you want to go. It's not, the current system's not built for that, and the next should be. So how do we open ourselves up with server-side to collect data from all of those points? And I've talked a lot about IoT, but if you're working in a company with like production lines or like any other thing that's important to be linked with analytics, this is a system that can collect data from anywhere. We have a CPG customer that actually uses signals from their warehouses to know, they link it with Google Analytics, and they can then understand the scope of when they're going to have big hits and they need to hire or push things around, or we need to have more people on the shifts. How are we going to get all of this product out? So when you start thinking of like comparing your data with other things, being able to collect from anywhere is really, really important. This one couldn't be more obvious. We're doing first-party data strategy. It's got to go into warehouses. And like I said before, most client-side TMS providers don't do it. It's very difficult to do on the client side. It is a button click on server-side. Every single server-side platform I've ever looked at has a connection straight to multiple data warehouses. And really the beauty of server-side GTM is not only does it automatically connect to BigQuery, and that's just something you set up immediately, but it also has the ability to write custom destinations. So if you decide you have some other place that isn't a supported tag for some reason, go build it. It's right there. You have the control. We're not putting you in that box that you've been in. Now you can do whatever you want. So and the last point that I have here, and then I have a couple closing slides. Everything with third party is you don't have control on how long it's processed. You don't have control on how they delete it. You don't have control on how you're going to do GDPR requests, or if you do business in the States, CCPA requests, or any of those things. So not only having a first-party data set is good for those reasons and getting away from the third-party ownership model, but it also allows you to massively lower the time to insights. Another company that we worked with built streaming data for their UTMs, what UTMs are performing the best during the holiday period, so like Black Friday time, which ones are performing the best. How can we predict how they're going to go for the rest of the day based off of that data? So we get it instantly. Let's predict what those UTMs are going to do based off of trends. And then we'll hand that to the marketing team. If they're like, ooh, that channel's doing bad, send out that email blast, get out those coupons, start pumping that channel. Or if the channel's exceeding, let's save the coupon and just make the money. It's doing what we're supposed to be doing. But they have the information there very quickly to react. What this is doing is those types of goals. And then that goal might not make sense for your business. Some instant goal does. Some instant dashboard. Some action makes sense. That goes back to the question. So how can we lower time to insights? All right, so all that to say, technology's here. This isn't something where we need to be afraid of this change. We can see it's really easy to address all these problems with the infrastructure. We just have to switch to a new infrastructure. With that being said, we know there's going to be a decrease of behavioral, a rise of contextual, but it's not a return to the past. We have better systems, better collecting, better classification. We can store it better, we can model it better, we can display it better, we can predict it better. All this technology that's gone on from the 90s when contextual was king, and then now we've switched. We've evolved a lot. So when you look at this, you can look at it as I can adopt new technology, expand very quickly and edge out my customers, or I can keep trying to patch this old system that's not built for this. So adopting that new technology is a way to get ahead of what's going on. Also, and this is really important, third-party cookies aren't away yet. So you have a little bit of time while the whole industry has these signals going on for you to be able to study what's going on and test the market. If you're going to adopt this technology and you want vision into what's going on, there is one time-sensitive constraint here, and it's that in this time, you could look at the signals and understand how your tests are going for a very limited amount of time. You've got a little bit of time to react to this. So that's another thing to keep in mind. It's not that these techniques won't work in the future, but if you want to look from every possible angle of data, that is one thing that will be going away that exists now for a short period of time. All right, I went too far. So that's it. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Yeah.
Thank you, Tyler, for a lot of good insights there around server sides. One of the concepts that Tyler had mentioned there around the questions that we're asking of our data, those questions aren't necessarily changing. It's the mechanisms that we have available to us in order to get answers and then take action from those answers that are changing. And Tyler highlighted a number of kind of ways in which use cases are changing and how server-side can be a mechanism in order to be able to get those insights surfaced much faster and to start layering in additional insights and data sources in order to be able to mine that data set.